Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Blitz Growth. Today we have Arnt here, who is a very impressive person who's done a bunch of branding for Fortune 500 companies. He's got a podcast called Marketing at Heart. He's just released a brand new book, and today we're going to talk to him about how to improve your branding, improve your creativity. He's also got some very impressive people backing him. So he's helped the CMO of PayPal simplify their marketing and branding messaging. He's interviewed people like Gary Vee and worked with a ton of amazing brands. So we're going to dive into all of that today, and you're going to learn a ton about branding and improving your creativity. So Art, so nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I am really thankful. This is going to be exciting.
Great. So I know that was just a very small part of your career, and I just took out some main highlights, but how did you actually get started, and what is kind of your main value proposition when you're having conversations with brands and people about how you help them?
Wow. Okay. How much time do we have? No. So I started actually by education. I have a master's in visual communication. So I started as a graphic designer and art director in a small local agency in Norway. But then throughout my years in the career, I've excelled to become creative director. And then I became chief innovation officer for DDB and a few other global agencies, and then also the executive creative director for Ogilvy in the Nordics. And yeah, I pretty much worked with every single category you can imagine, from fast-moving consumer goods when it comes to McDonald's, Pepsi, Tropicana, all these kind of products. Banking and finance, you mentioned PayPal, American Express, Visa, and as well as retail, beverages, Bacardi, et cetera, et cetera. I've pretty much done it all, which has been both a curse and a blessing coming from a small country, because in smaller countries, you kind of have to just, try to work with everything. So you kind of become that generalist that just, you tackle the issues that comes. But then when I came into these more bigger companies and bigger agencies, then suddenly you become the specialist. So what I've honed into is now to become a creative strategist. So I work with brands, and my personal vision is to use my knowledge, my curiosity, and my passion to make a positive impact on people around me. And that's pretty much what I do when it comes to brands that I work with, or when it comes to influencers or consultancies or friends that just like, hey, I need some help. What am I going to do? And also, like, when it comes to friends and family that just wants to have a conversation about stuff, I try to have that positive mindset of like, how can I help? And I think that's been a good thing over the years.
Yeah, well, working with so many brands, it's pretty amazing. First off, getting to see behind the scenes on all of those things and how those large corporations work. And I know branding is a big part of what you do. So what's kind of explain the difference between having a strong brand versus not having a brand? Because I think a lot of like not only creators, but also a lot of companies kind of don't really understand the concept of branding.
Yeah. Well, Martin Neumeyer kind of nailed it when he says that a brand is a person's gut feeling when it comes to a product, service, or organization. Meaning, if you have an emotional feeling, an emotional experience or emotional opinion about a product, service, or company, that makes it become a brand. And a lot of people think that as long as you have a logo, you have a brand. It's not true. A logo is just a logo. It's nothing else. And the same when it comes to having a beautiful website or having a good product that, of course, is the best product that is out there. Still, it's just a product. It's nothing more. The moment that people have a personal experience with that product or service, that's when it becomes a brand. And the challenge, which is something that I do address in the book that I just wrote, is the fact that people forget to take the time to figure out, who are we? Why do we exist? What is our purpose? What do we provide of value to the consumers that we try to reach? And then what kind of problems do we solve? What is the pain point? Like, are we a painkiller, or are we something that inspires? You're just figuring out those single tiny details, which are so important, is the thing that people skip the most. And what they do, they jump straight into methods. It's like, I built a website, I have a product, I want to do Facebook advertising, I'm going to do TikTok, I'm going to do Instagram, I'm just going to promote out of it. Pardon my French.
It's all good.
Beep. And then in a way they forget about like what's the essence of who we are. And I think that's what boils it down. Like what is a brand is like, it is the essence of who you are and what kind of impact, what kind of dent in the universe you want to make with the product and service that you provide.
So for someone who's maybe just started a company, or they've just started producing content for themselves, and they want to really position themselves to have a strong brand from day one, what are a few tips for someone getting started and, you know, creating a strong brand, or at least laying a good foundation for building a strong brand?
Right. I tend to go into the 5 C's, and the 5 C's is about like the company. What is the company? What is the purpose, the mission, what's the North Star of the company? And then you go into the category. What kind of category are we operating in? Who is within the category? Then the consumer or the customer. Who's the target group? What are they doing? What's their habits? What's their media consumption, etc., etc. Then go into context. Like, how does the society around us look like? Like, are there social things we need to be aware of? Economic, technology things that we need to be aware of that will affect the company? And then the final thing is channels. So when we know who the consumer is, then we also should know what kind of channels we should operate in. And it's not just about operating the channels that the consumer is in, but also the channels that we feel more comfortable operating in. Because again, if we feel hopelessly foolish, or we find it awkward to operate on Twitter or Instagram or do TikTok videos because, you know, it's like, it's a little bit cringing, don't do it. Then find another way to get that message out. But at least like focus on those 5 C's, super important, because then you map out what the essence of the company is. That's how you start the brand. But then you also have and that's the thing that I kind of like think that is the most important thing when it comes to marketing. Know where you are, because that's the only way you're going to figure out where to go. Yeah.
And I think a few people get too far ahead of themselves. They don't do that foundational look over of their company, and they think they're something that they're not, and then they run into issues of finding out why people aren't buying, or why people aren't resonating or engaging, or whatever it may be. It's because you don't understand the customer too well yet.
Exactly.
So, and so you've probably seen so many mistakes made over the years. What are some of the biggest mistakes brands or people make to, I would say, not destroy their brand, but, you know, take a few steps back?
Yeah.
What should people avoid?
I think the biggest red flag for me is, and I see this across the board everywhere, is that so many companies and brands and just people in general are just focused about how important it is for them to say something. And they forget to focus about, it's not about you, it's about the audience. It's about the consumer that you're trying to reach. Like, what are their pain points? What do they care about? Why should they listen to you? And like, who are you? Why should they care about what you have to say? Like, figuring out those kind of simple things is super important. But that's where most people fail today, because they are so focused on all the unique things that they have to sell and promote and talk about, that they actually just get lost. Like, they can't see the forest for the trees because they're just so hung up in their own silver shining bullet in a way.
Sorry, continue.
No. So basically, I would say that's the biggest issue, that they focus too much about their own story instead of like figuring out like what's important. And then secondly, trying to smear, like, how do you, like, there's a Norwegian expression saying that you're spreading yourself too thin. And basically it's like you try to tackle everything in the shortest amount of time. Meaning you try to, like, instead of focusing on one channel where, you know, like, this is where I'm going to build my tribe. This is where I'm going to, you know, in my book, I'm talking about the fact that, like, storytelling has been part of human history. Like, we had the bonfire, we lit the bonfire, and then people started gathering around the bonfire to hear stories. And if you do that consistently, then more and more people will come. And if the stories are good, more and more people will come because it's like, this is interesting. This is valuable to me. This provides something. And that's also something that I see many do as a mistake. They just jump on the latest trend because they think that that's what's going to work, but it's never going to work. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I can't remember who said this, but I saw an amazing quote one time that was, marketing is what gets people to the party, and then branding is the reason they stay.
Exactly.
So similar to your bonfire analogy, you've got to have both, but at the end of the day, the branding is really important because you want to keep people following you. You want to keep people engaging, and you want to really make the most of your marketing efforts, because you can have the best marketing in the world, but if people aren't hanging around or people aren't buying, all the marketing in the world's not going to help you. But you also made a good point actually about how to listen to the customers or the followers and how to cater more to them. Is there any sort of particular way that you suggest brands connect with their audiences better?
Well, the easiest thing is actually just to ask questions. Once you start asking people, and when you do it authentically and you do it like with full transparency, it's like, listen, this is where we are. We're thinking, should we go for A, B, C, or D? And then start engaging and asking questions. Then it's kind of surprising how much people are willing to actually give their time to answer, because the few that are there, and I think this is like, you can boil it down to the power of three. If you have, let's say that you have 3 or 5 followers, and those are really engaged with you and your company or your brand, as long as you ask them questions and they start answering, then again, more people will be attracted and start following, because like, hey, there's like interesting stuff happening here. It's not just a one-way conversation. It's actually a dialogue. It's like the brand cares about me enough to ask for my opinion. That's valuable. So yeah, I think
that's like asking. And so that's like asking questions on social media, in your email lists. If I suppose you're working with those really large companies, it's also about, listening during those activations and all the events that they sponsor and do. Because I'm sure you've seen, huge amounts of in-person activations with brands like Pepsi and all those sorts of people. It's a good point. And then with all of that information, like once they start asking the opinions, once you start getting some feedback, what people think of you, people think of your product and all those sorts of things, what do you like to do with that information? Like, how do you take that information and actually get something out of it? Because I know a lot of people will collect this information, they'll ask the questions, but then they won't actually act on it, or they won't actually use it for anything. So it's kind of defeats the purpose of it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like, I guess it's like it started about 10 years ago when people started talking about big data. Like, all this data is out there. You can just collect it. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, the data is there. I mean, when you monitor the conversation that happens on social media and you pay attention to your brand being mentioned, either if it's positive, neutral, and negative comments or whatever, the data is there. So it's just about harvesting that data and then filter that data. And I think that's also where a lot of companies are not utilizing the data in a proper way, because they don't know what to use the data for. And I think a lot of consultancies and agencies back, 5-10 years ago started like pushing the fact like, oh, we can collect all this data. We need monitoring tools. We need to use like Salesforce, and we need to use all these massive tools that can gather all this data. And then companies were like, yeah, we need to. But at the end of the day, it's like, what are we going to use it for? And that's the problem. And I'm working now on a bigger global client where I've actually done one-to-one interviews. I've been interviewing 30 people just to get their insights and knowledge about the product and the brands and the category itself. But then it's about, again, like, okay, what's the purpose? Why do I need this data? At this moment in time, what do I need this data for? And of course, in this situation for me, it's about, I'm going to create a marketing campaign that is going to be global for the next 2 years. So then I need to know, okay, what are the trigger points? What are the consumers thinking about the category? Are there any barriers or drivers that I need to be aware of which means that I can then use communication to twist and change that behavior in a proper way. So I think data is nice. It's beautiful to have data, but you need to find the way to actually use the data in a proper way. And that means that filter again into the proper things of like, okay, what's the problem I need to solve? what data do I need to solve that problem, and how can I then maximize the value of that data so that it actually makes sense?
Yeah, so it really comes down to using that data for better value propositions, better marketing offers, better identification of pain points, that sort of thing. Because I suppose you can collect all that data, and then if you're not changing your product or your marketing messaging, you've kind of wasted your time collecting it all.
Yep. You wasted your time and you wasted a lot of money. It doesn't make sense. I mean, if it comes down to if you know what your company is about, if you know the purpose, then you also know what kind of pain point are you going to change for people, what matters to people, and then you use that data to figure out, okay, are we doing that at the moment, or are we not doing that? I mean, it's pretty basic. That's the thing, but we just make it very complicated.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard to conceptualize. Like, branding is very hard to conceptualize. It's not as tangible as a lot of the other things that a business owner will focus on. So I think it is really hard to do well. But speaking of that, what are some brands that you kind of see in the day-to-day that are just like doing a really good job at branding? And then what are some that aren't doing a good job and people should use? So some people should use as an example and be like, okay, we need to copy or get inspiration from these brands, and then we need to avoid what these sorts of brands are doing.
Wow, that's a very big question, and I'm monitoring so many brands that it's kind of like I think, for example, I would say that Patagonia is a really solid brand that is on point at all times. They know who they are, they know what they stand for, and they actually find different ways to tell that brand story and to tell that message. I would say that's a brand that really has lived up to the brand promise, and it also is like executing that through all the marketing that they're doing. So that's a brand that I admire.
This has kind of put you on the spot, I know.
Yeah, thank you. Could have given me a heads up on that one. I would have prepared. No, but when it comes to other companies, I would say, like, for example, Revolut is also a company that I find interesting in the way that externally they're doing a really good job of being like the innovators of the financial industry, providing financial services both for individuals and for companies. But then again, you have that issue of or the gap between external marketing and then internal marketing, because it seems that they have like an internal culture that is a problem, that employers are complaining, and so you have that negative perception, but also a positive perception that separates the people and the brand and the product.
That's actually an interesting point. So you're saying there's like internal branding of like how everybody who works on the brand perceives it, and then there's external branding, what do your customers and public perceive it as?
Exactly.
Because like I think WeWork is like one of the best case studies for this. Up until a certain point, it was the branding on it was great, and then it kind of hit that tipping point, and the internal branding ended up going very south. Whereas before that, I think the internal branding was really good. And so I know, what's your opinions on WeWork? Because I know that's a big talking point for branding and how to position yourself, and then how not to ruin your brand.
Yeah, well, there's you have WeWork, you have Uber, you have quite a few of those kind of like where you have a leadership issue, where the branding, the idea, the communications, the marketing is on point. It makes sense, and it resonates with a lot of people, that like the consumer, the audience, the creatives that actually need this kind of space. For us, it's like, wow, this is amazing. We love the idea, and it grows into something that is amazing. But then suddenly it starts to fall apart from within because of culture issues. And I think that's also something that it fascinates me when it comes to how companies handle their employees. And number one is like many companies have like amazing onboarding kits. Well, like especially larger corporations, like here's the onboarding kit, this is how we do it, this is our policies, our values, etc., etc. But then when the person leaves the company, there's nothing. So what's the end perception when you leave a company? It's like, okay, I resigned or I got fired or whatever, but I got nothing. Like there's nothing to make sure that I leave with a good perception of the brand, so that when I meet people 1 month or 3 months or 6 months later, I am telling a positive story instead of saying like, yeah, I left that company, but now I'm working at this another amazing company. I think that just shifting that story would be amazing for internal culture, because again, if you take care of the people after they worked for you, it would actually be, they are the brand ambassadors. And one thing is current employers are brand ambassadors, but then ex-employers is also the best example. If you have ex-employees talking positively about your brand, that means that you did a good job.
There you go. That's a good KPI. Do your ex-employees talk positively or negatively about your brand? That's interesting though. I think the exit interview, something that we do a lot of the time. And we do gain a lot of information from that, and that helps kind of change different policies or different procedures that we follow. But yeah, having some sort of, outboarding, I suppose, instead of inboarding, could definitely help brands for sure. And okay, so that's some good examples there. My next question was actually going to be talking about smaller brands here. So smaller brands who maybe don't have as much infrastructure, they don't have as many employees or resources, that sort of thing. What's the best way to know if you're doing a good or a bad job with your branding? And I suppose, what are some indicators that they can look at kind of month over month to see if they're improving or getting worse?
Well, small brands, I mean, it all comes down to the interactions, the touch points that they have with their customer. I would say that a really good indicator would be if you have a customer that actually returns. If it's just one-off customers, that means that you need to use a lot of effort of bringing people through the door. And of course, that initial stage, I define the customer journey in 3 stages. I have the find stage, the like stage, and the love stage. Find is about how do you convert strangers into customers. Like is about how do you convert customers into advocates. And love is, of course, how do you get advocates to spread the word through word of mouth, etc. And become a recurring customer. But in that find phase is okay, again, it's about if you use let's say the typical channels, Facebook or newsletters, or you use Instagram or whatever social channel you use. I mean, one KPI is just to figure out okay, how many people are following us more per month or per week or whatever, and what kind of interactions do we have? Do they care about what we're saying? Do they engage with the content, or is it no engagement at all? Because then again, if it's no engagement, it's okay, we need to figure it out. What can we change? As you were mentioning earlier. Secondly, once you have a customer, it's about, again, what kind of interactions do we have with the customer? Are they happy with the products? Do they come back? Do they have questions? What kind of customer service do we provide for them? What kind of, again, touch points, interactions do we have with the customer? And then where the final stage is about how can we delight the customer? Because again, what we want, what I think every brand should really work hard on is how to delight the customer. So make sure that they sit back and think this was an amazing experience and I need to tell people. It's not about I can tell my friends, but it's I have to tell my friends. So again, word of mouth is the ultimate kind of benchmark of that you've succeeded.
Yeah, well, you do see a lot of very successful brands grow really off word of mouth and through ambassador programs, whether they're rewarding them or not. You make a really good point. And those 3 phases, I think, are really good to focus on. And, a good tangible metric is, repeat customer rate. So you can see that pretty easily in your store or however you're doing all your transactions. So that's an easy metric to follow. And then in terms of your ambassadors, what is kind of important to arm your customers or even ambassadors with the right materials or the right opportunities to help them talk about your brand? Because there's ambassador programs, there's referral programs, there's all this other stuff. But how do you see successful brands using ambassadors and influencers successfully?
I think the ones that are most successful are the ones that control the narrative. Because again, branding is about like, how do you apply the message that you have holistically through all channels? And if you have ambassadors, if you have, and an ambassador can be, again, your employees is the number one ambassador that you have, because they will come home and talk to their families about how work was. And if they are complaining when they come home, it's a negative ambassador. If they come back home and say like, it was an amazing day at work today. I was doing this and this and this, and I had, we're doing some amazing stuff for our customers or for our clients, they're a good ambassador. But I think, controlling the narrative, which means that, have a simple brand message and not overcomplicate it. And like, I took my own medicine, because I was kind of like, whenever people ask me, so yeah, what kind of services do you provide? What do you do, Art? What do you do for a living? Like, how can you help us? And I was like, well, I simplify the complexity of marketing. I can help you with branding. I can help you with this. And then suddenly it was like a plethora of things that I was saying. Mm-hmm. But then I just started like I can't do that, because it's like every time is a different narrative. So then I boiled it down to like, well, I'm using my knowledge, my passion, and my curiosity to make a positive impact. That's it. And that can be done through branding, marketing, strategy, but just in a way honing in on like that simple message, like what is the brand about and what are we trying to do and how are we trying to change? And then apply that story to as many people as possible, because if it is simple enough, then people will remember it. And when they remember it, they can tell it to others.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. You need to make it very clear to customers about, what's the value of your product, what's the value of your brand, and how is it different? I think those things, because I think brands that do something different are always much easier to get word of mouth on. So, one big one that I see a lot of brands doing is, being more socially aware about the environment and the manufacturing procedures and what impact that has. What's your take on whether brands should use like additional kind of storylines, like, environmental impact in their branding and in their messaging, and including that as kind of like a value proposition to people purchasing from them? Like, biggest example being Tom's. Yeah. What's your idea on that for brands getting started?
I think that the most important thing is that it's aligned with the brand values. If you do it for the sake of doing social good, but it doesn't align with the brand, it doesn't align, and you're actually not authentic about why you're doing it, then it's going to fall on its face. And the thing is, number one is like millennials, it's an interesting, number one, it's a huge target group, but millennials in general are people that say they care about environment, they say they care about sustainability, et cetera. At the end of the day, it comes down to price. It's like, if they have the option between a product that is very sustainable produced versus a regular product, and the price is a big difference, they will always choose the cheaper option. However, Gen Zs are the complete opposite. They actually care about all this social responsibility and sustainability, and is it the carbon footprint and how things was it produced with cruelty towards animals, et cetera. And if you try to fake your engagement within that realm, the Gen Zs will abandon you before you can say, aha, they're going to be gone. And it also affects their decision making when it comes to like what kind of job, what kind of company they want to work with, and what kind of company they want to purchase from. So my opinion is like, I think it's amazing if companies can improve their production line or improve their branding or the way that they provide their services by thinking about the planet and sustainability and all these kind of things. But if they can't, then that's okay too. But then don't change the narrative to kind of fake that story. Then just stick to who you are and what you stand for, and that's it.
Because the example you gave of Patagonia earlier, unbelievable at doing the recycling programs and improving their production lines and that sort of thing. But that's only because they can do it. If you're just getting started, the cost of that might be too high. So it might be better in some cases to hold off before you release those sorts of initiatives. But I do think it does benefit people's brands.
Yeah, definitely. Like, again, as long as it's an authentic activation, then I am all in for it. I think that the biggest issue, and especially this is relevant for smaller brands, is like you say, they don't have the budgets, they don't have the capacity to do these kind of initiatives. And that's, again, it's okay. It's like if they are aware of the fact that we want to become a company that are like, this is the goal we have, and help us achieve that goal. That's a very honest narrative. That's a very honest story to tell. Or if you are blessed enough to come up with an idea that you have a product that is from day one can be sustainable production and minimize the carbon footprint, perfect. But I mean, again, if you're a small company, then at least you can say that these are the things that we strive for and we want to achieve, but at this point we can't.
Okay, so it's like goals and aspirations. So are you kind of in the camp that all whether it's a store or a service or whatever, should have kind of pretty detailed about pages to sort of build a story around their brand? Because, we work with a lot of brands and half of them are on the fence about, we really want to show people who we are, what we do, what we care about. And then on the other half, we've got the people who are like, no, I just care about, what the profitability is, page load speed, minimize the amount of clicks that people can have so that they spend more time clicking the buy buttons. What's kind of your suggestion for brands building their website and how much branding they should actually include on that?
Good question. I think I have a very simple way of looking at these things. I divide content into two categories. You have the hero content, and then you have the hygiene content. And the hero content is the content that captivates you, that kind of like tells that brand message or that unique selling proposition regarding the product or services that you provide. And the front page and the main pages should only contain hero content. It's like simple to consume, simple to understand. Buy the button, you press the buy button, etc., etc. Then I think also brands need to focus on hygiene content, meaning if they get a loyal customer that reoccurs and comes back to the website and buys again and again, they also get curious about the story. They want to know more about the branding story. They want to know more about what are they about, what are their values, what are their principles, etc., etc. So hygiene content can come on the second or third level, like when you go deep down. A good example of that is like how, for example, Volvo with the epic split with Van Damme, hero content. Like to break it down when it comes to video, they did that as a hero content. So it grabs people's attention. Didn't grab the people's attention when it came to the target group, but people were like, wow, Volvo did that thing, Van Damme, blah, 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 whatever. People were made aware of the fact that Volvo makes these huge trucks. But then afterwards, when people started searching about Volvo and Volvo trucks, etc., then hygiene content came in, and how the trucks were made, how easy they are to steer, all the details in nitty-gritty detail, videos and video upon video, because the truck drivers suddenly were like, they had a story to talk about because everyone had seen the Van Damme split, but then they were also like getting deep into like all the specs and the technology behind the Volvo trucks. So it's like a brilliant example of like creating hero to captivate and then having hygiene to make sure that you get in depth.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think a good way for brands to do that is through email marketing. Once you go through that purchase, you're then kind of getting the product, and then you can start maybe educating more on, as you're saying, the nitty gritty, and also the kind of brand positioning and where they stand on all the different types of topics they have to be involved in. Because it does probably depend on the product as well, I would say. Like if I'm just buying, let's say a USB stick, I'm probably not going to be that interested in the brand. Whereas if I'm buying kind of like, new clothes or something, I'm wondering where the sustainability of that's coming from.
Yeah.
I should be worried about the sustainability of the USB stick, actually. That's probably worse.
Probably worse. No, but it is like the products that you identify yourself with. Like what kind of watch do you wear? What kind of pen do you use? What kind of notebook? Like, are you a Moleskine user, or do you use any other kind of notebook systems? All those kind of things matter. So the daily objects that we surround ourselves with, we have a stronger emotional connection. And when we have a strong emotional connection, then we want to know more. And that's where it comes to play. Like, okay, let's say that I'm using Moleskine, then it's paper, but what kind of paper? Is it okay? Is it done in a proper way? Can I feel good about buying this product, or am I doing something stupid because like maybe they are doing all these kind of bad chemicals, and then I'm going to be all these kind of questions. So I agree. Like you can use email definitely to again telling that story and reminding people that, hey, we're doing actually some pretty good stuff here, and thank you for being part of our journey.
Okay, so I've just got a few more questions to wrap up. First off, let's talk about your book and your podcast a little bit. Straight away caught my eye. You've interviewed Gary Vee. I'm sure that's not an easy feat. How do you, what sort of content do you like to talk about on your podcast? And then, what were your main takeaways with Gary Vee? I've just got to, looking at it from your perspective, how did that interview kind of impact what you do and your sort of strategy in terms of the service you offer to, all these big brands or small brands?
Yeah, well, the story with Gary is kind of, I am the kind of person that if I decide that I want to do something, I just have to do it. And my rendezvous with Gary started in 2008 when he was speaking at a Future of Web Apps conference in London. And he had this amazing presentation on stage, no slides, nothing. He was just walking around the stage talking about everything and using his curse words as usual. And I was just sitting on the front line. And when he was done, I just went straight up to him and I said, hey, I'm trying to I want to record a video podcast with you. Can I steal you for 5 minutes? And he was like, yeah, sure. And then he just answered a bunch of other questions from other people. And then he went with me and we actually sat and did a video podcast for another podcast that I did back in the days. But that's how it started. And then since then, me and him has been having conversations and we've been going out for drinks together and talking together. And then I just said to him, look, I'm starting a podcast. I would love for you to come and give your perspectives when it comes to marketing and, your insights and your thoughts. And that's how it started. He is a very interesting personality. And, my take when it comes to asking questions on the podcast was I kind of had the same script for everyone. It's like, what do you see is the future? What are the challenges? What are the problems? But then diving also into the more personal stuff. For example, I wanted to know why he was so hung up on the idea of buying the jets and what's going to happen once he did it. Because again, it's a very purpose-driven mission. You have this idea from when you are 8 years old, I'm going to buy the jets. And then it's like, okay, so when you achieve it, then what? And it was kind of insightful to hear his answer. It was a fun podcast. But that was basically the idea. I've been inviting a lot of CMOs to come on the podcast because I think CMOs have very different takes on marketing. They have very different takes on how to do marketing based on which company they work for. So when I talked to the head of design at Philips, he had his way of thinking about branding and marketing that is completely different than the person that was representing LinkedIn and how they think branding and strategy and marketing. So, all these kind of perspectives is valuable, not only to me, but also, of course, to the audience as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. Every brand goes about branding and marketing differently. So, it's no surprise that there's so many different ways of doing the same thing. And it's probably really interesting for you to continually expand your, I suppose, deck of strategies and suggestions that you make for your clients too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry. That was the reason why I wrote the book as well. Is for me, it started actually with my pain point of meeting so many brands that did it the wrong way. They started with the methods and they didn't focus on the principles. I discovered this quote by Harrington Emerson that was he was an efficiency consultant back in the early 1900s. So he went into corporations and analyzed through data, why are you not producing fast enough? Like the Industrial Revolution, it should be optimized, it should be improved. And then his quote was as to methods, there's a million and then some, but the people that follow the principles will be able to do everything, but the people that follow the methods will not manage to do anything. And it's kind of true. And when you boil it down to marketing and branding, it's like you have these principles when it comes to branding and marketing. It's very simple. It's basic. We just have different ways of applying these principles in today's media ecosystem. So I think, and that's why I wanted to write the book, because again, I wanted more people to be aware of, like, build the foundation first before you start being active on TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and God knows what. Like, focus on who you are, what kind of problem you want to solve, and where you want to go, and then you can start applying the methods. So it's the timeless, tangible principles and tools to build your brand legacy. That's the subtitle of the book. It's been a fun.
Well, give us a look at the book. When is it out? Where can we get it?
It's it's everywhere. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble in the US. It's on Kindle. It's ebook and hardcover and softcover. And the audiobook is going to be out in a month, I think. Nice. So yeah, it's been like a pain it was a pain to write, because I think I did the skeleton 7 years ago. Like, I just made the wireframe, like, this is what the book is going to be about. But then it's like, okay, question, how do you write a book? I had no idea. So that was the process.
Yeah, well, I was about to ask you that, actually. 'Cause we had another guest on the podcast who was also doing, she started off in actually e-commerce and then pivoted into publishing. And she said that her first book was a nightmare. It just took forever. It was really hard to figure out. And as she did more, she kind of got a little bit more used to it. What was the hardest part about producing a book? What was the biggest pain point?
Getting started. That was the biggest one. Like, just figuring out, like, how do you start writing a book? It's like, I for me, it's like, I'm the kind of person that I'm curious, so I need to figure out, like, somebody has to have written something about how to write a book. But the problem with that is, like, everyone has their different methods again, where they try to, some start just like doing research on different topics, and they start with the last chapter, and then they do the mid chapter, and then they do the first chapter, while others have the complete reverse process. So for me, it was more like, okay, again, boiling it down to the principle, what do I want to say with this book? What kind of problem do I want to solve for people with this book? And once I had that figured out, then it was just starting to write. And the second pain point was also, once I was like half through and I had mostly everything roughly written down, then I was like, okay, how do I get this published? Like, what kind of publishing company do I go to? How, like, who would be interested in this? And that was kind of a very distressful situation, because, I mean, I was looking at, who had given out the books for Gary Vee and for Seth Godin and all these. And, like, of course, they are major names, big brands, etc. And when I wrote to those publishers, they were like, no, thank you, but interesting, but bye. I don't know who you are. I don't know why you're writing us. So that was like, okay, sorry for disturbing. It was tough. Yeah. So, and I had quite a few of those. Where you just get rejection upon rejection. And then you realize, like, okay, this is a business book. It's a different kind of jungle when it comes to these things. And then, just finding the right partner and then get the process running. Once I had the publisher set, it took me 30 days and then the book was done.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the publisher is the most important thing when it comes to publishing a book, like going with the right publishing company.
Yeah, well, you need to have the wireframe. You need to figure out, like, what is the book about and what kind of problem are you going to solve? And you need to kind of like have that narrative or that the summary of what the book is going to be about, because that's your selling point. You need to sell to the different publishers and try to make them understand, like, okay, yeah, this could be useful for whatever target you're trying to approach. But then to go to the next level of finalizing the book, you need to have a publisher, because number one, they're going to push you and, like, ask you questions. And then once the book is written, you're going to get an editor that's going to break down everything you've done and go through everything and make sure that it's on point, that grammar is on point. There's no typos or anything. So just to make sure that the product, is ready for the shelves. So yeah.
Okay, and my last question. So this is the one that I've been holding on, and I actually really want to know the answer to. So, what's your advice with brands trying to manage branding versus profitability? So we work with a bunch of e-commerce brands. We do all of their advertising and that sort of thing on Facebook and those sorts of things. And there is the constant question of, I like the look of this ad, or I like the look of this company's creative, but then they also want to be like, I want to be ROI positive. I want to have a good return on my ad spend investment. So what's your advice for brands trying to balance branding versus, performance conversion sort of tactics?
Right. This is it is a very complex question because, for example, two of the biggest brands, you can take Coca-Cola and you can take L'Oreal. Coca-Cola and L'Oreal do a lot of branding because they just want to plaster that logo as many places as possible all around the world. So that means that whenever you go into a retail store or a supermarket, you will see the L'Oreal logo, or you will see a Coca-Cola, and you will be instantly reminded, like, oh yeah, I'm thirsty, I'm gonna get a cola, or I need a shampoo, or I need some kind of body product, and then L'Oreal is top of mind because they spend massive amounts of money just to make sure that the logo is visual or visible to as many people as possible. That's one way of doing branding. If you have enough money, please go ahead and do as much branding as possible. However, not many companies have that luxury. So it comes down to this simple thing. If you have, and everyone has the need to do marketing, but if you do marketing, make sure that you know what your brand voice is. What is the tone of voice? What is the personality of your brand? And then make sure that you apply that holistically in every message that you do. That the logo is represented in the proper way in the material that is being made. Because that's branding. I mean, marketing is branding as well. So doing e-commerce ads and trying to lead people with the call to action and ROIs and et cetera, it's branding. It's just like it is branding within the message of selling something or providing something. So I think that the most important thing is just to make sure that you know what the brand stands for, you know how visually it's supposed to be applied, and what's the tone of voice. And if you have those three things on point, it's going to work.
Yeah, it's a very complex question. So yeah, love the input you're putting on that. I'm going to use that.
No, but yeah, it's interesting, and it's also something that that's why I call the book Brand New Economics, because again, Brand New Economics is about like how the interactions, perceptions, and behaviors of the consumer affect the bottom line of a company. And you can measure that through tangible and intangible interactions. So again, it's like branding is intangible. You can't measure a brand, but you can measure how many positive messages you get, how many negative messages you get. You can measure how many people come to your website or come to your social media feed. And then you can start asking questions like, what are the brand perceptions? And you can measure from the beginning of the year until the end of the year, like, have the brand perception changed? So that's an intangible that can be measured. But then you have all the tangibles, which is like back to the ROI of doing things. And the sum of everything ends up in being what the brand is all about. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, no, really appreciate it. And because, yeah, that's a question I have to answer all the time. Okay, so Arnt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This is a period where just tell us where we can find your book, where we can find your podcast, where we can get in touch with you, the latest project that you're working on. Yeah, take it away. How can people find out more about you?
Yeah. Well, it's easy. You can actually just search for Arnt Eriksen, and then you'll find me everywhere, because I've been so lucky that my name is kind of unique. So, so all the domains were available. So arnteriksen.com is available. So that's where you find my main site. And on Instagram, I'm also Arnt Eriksen. And on LinkedIn, I'm Arnt Eriksen. So you'll find me there. The book is called brandneweconomics.com. So that's where you find everything about the book. And Marketing at Heart is the website for my company, and also where you find my podcast, etc. So those are the three main places where you can find me.
Nice. What's your favorite channel?
Well, the thing is, like, I love to tell stories. Stories is kind of like, that's who I am at the core. I write books, I write blog posts, I do photography. So I try to tell stories either visually or verbally. And I do enjoy Instagram, even though I do think that Instagram has kind of lost its spark a bit, especially as a photographer. Is like it doesn't work anymore. But then I would say professionally, I truly use LinkedIn at its maximum capacity. For me, that's where I network with people. That's where I have valuable conversations. That's where when I am in need of either getting a question answered or get in touch with the right people to figure out where to go next, that's where I operate. So LinkedIn for me is gold.
Nice. So you heard it. If you want to get in touch with Arnt, LinkedIn is the best channel. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate everything that you've shared with us. Super interesting. And I know branding is such a massive topic, and it's very hard to conceptualize, like we mentioned. So I do think a lot of people do need help with branding, because not enough people think about it. And the brands who do think about it and get ahead of it and have really strong brands, they do seem to be much more successful when it comes to repeat customers, having strong brand ambassador programs, having strong word of mouth. And all of that stuff is much more cost effective than ads. So definitely think about how you can improve your branding and include that in your marketing strategy, because it can have a very good ROI if done correctly. So yeah, thank you so much, Art. And I really appreciate it all the time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It was a good conversation. Thank you.
Hey guys, we put a bunch of effort into making great content for this YouTube channel. So please hit subscribe, leave us a comment, hit like, and tell a few friends about it.